it's my favorite phrase, and it's been this way for a few decades. It's the comment that what's ordinary to you is amazing to others, right? We all overestimate what other people know and underestimate what we know. When the truth is that you've learned things through your life that could help other people, right? The person that understands fourth grade math is a genius to the person that's in second grade. And he's probably better off to help the second grader than somebody that's got a PhD in advanced mathematics. So I always remind myself of that. What's ordinary to you is amazing to others, and encourage you also, what you know, share it with other people as a podcast guest, as a podcast host, in blogs, whatever it is. I really believe we're blessed to be a blessing. And today, with all this technology, you could really share what you know.
Welcome to the Hands-On Business Podcast. Where else are you going to come to get tips, tricks, and advice on growing your business? As you know, what people tend to love about this podcast is that it is a place where you can hear real business leaders discussing systems, methodologies, and strategies that they have used to help them catapult growth in their business. So I'm your podcast host, Hakeem Adebiyi, and I've grown several small businesses to multi-million-pound enterprises, and noticed that there wasn't really a place that focused on where I was, i.e. growing a small business. All of the content that seemed to be out there was about big business, and often just a lot of theory and no practical implementable advice, which is exactly why I set up this podcast. So take a listen, enjoy, and start implementing the strategies that you hear on the podcast. Happy listening. Digital marketing. We talk about it all the time, and we discuss how to use it to grow our businesses and catapult results, etc. Now, I myself have done several episodes on this topic, and they've all been very well received. Today, however, we're going to take a slightly different approach to this topic and discuss how digital marketing may actually be hurting your business. A contentious statement, I'll grant you, but you may have noticed that marketing seems to be getting more efficient at things that are possibly having less effect. So maybe in 2024, it's time to look at marketing from a new angle, and that's the view of our guest today, Tom Schwab. Tom founded Interview Valet, the leading podcast interview marketing agency, a decade ago, and he's also known as the godfather of podcast interview marketing. He's got a book out as well, Podcast Guest Profits, How to Grow Your Business with a Targeted Interview Strategy, and being called the Bible of podcast guesting. Now, obviously, that doesn't make me nervous at all, and I'm really looking forward to this session. So welcome to the show, Tom. Very good to have you on.
Hakeem, I am thrilled to be here and excited to dive into this, and hopefully it'll be entertaining, educational, and people will be able to take action on it too.
That's the key for me, is that taking action, which I know that people love. So, first question. You're a Navy veteran. You've worked at a nuclear propulsion plant. Please tell me how you got from there to being an entrepreneur, an author, and a marketer.
Well, I think things only make sense in the rearview mirror. If you would have asked me where I would be, when I left the Navy, I would never have guessed this, right? Life is a evolution, not a revolution. So I always loved the times I was trained as an engineer. As you said, my first job out of college was running nuclear power plants in the Navy. And that taught me the systems, the processes. Often I'll laugh when business owners tell me, oh, you don't understand. My business is so complicated. My marketing is so complicated. It's like, no, you don't understand it, right? Because if they can systematize and teach and scale nuclear power using people that are, high school educated, very smart, very well trained, if they can do that, you can do it in your business. So really, I left the Navy, worked for corporate America for a while, and then realized that I had the entrepreneurial bug. And to me, the idea of working for one person, right, be it a government in the Navy or a Fortune 500 company, was very limited. And I like the idea of the job security, if you will, that comes from serving many people and learning and continuing to grow. There's a lot of problems in this world today, but there's no better time to be alive. And my last company, we built with inbound marketing using guest blogs. And about a decade ago, I thought, I bet you could use podcast interviews to tap into those audiences. And that's really what we're doing at Interview Valet, helping people grow their businesses with targeted podcast interviews.
Excellent. So just one thing I want to ask you about there, because you said about you moved to be an entrepreneur to have job security working for many different masters, for want of a better term. Just explain that to me, because I know a lot of people who are not entrepreneurs, are not in or not working for themselves, seem to think there's more job security working for one person. So I thought that's a really interesting take on the traditional.
Well, and I agreed with that when I was going through it, right? That when I grew up, it was go work for the Navy. When I left the Navy, my dad told me I was a fool. He's like, all you have to do is put in another 15 years. And I'm like, well, my marriage won't last another 15 years. And, when I was getting out, peace was breaking out. The Soviet Union had just collapsed, similar to what's happening now, right? There's a big drawdown in the military, and people that thought they had careers that were doing great, that were doing everything correctly, just got their jobs taken away from them. And I see the same thing in people that lived in corporate America, right? They did everything right. And then all of a sudden the company was bought, it was sold, whatever. The division was shut down. They moved the division overseas, whatever it was. And they had one employer that they were beholden to. And I just looked at it as I would rather work for lots of people, right? And we talk about in investing, diversification. Well, when you work for one person, you got one paycheck. Whereas when you work as an entrepreneur or as a freelancer, right, you're serving multiple people and they're all giving you a paycheck, right? And sometimes in professional services, they'll talk about that problem of client concentration, right? If you've only got 2 or 3 clients, you've got a problem, because if one of them changes and doesn't work with you, your whole business can go down the drain. And think about that for an individual. You've got the ultimate in client concentration if you've just got one client. So I look at it as I'll bet on myself that I can serve all these clients.
No, I think that's really well put. No, it's effectively about a diversification of risk, isn't it? So you never want to have, as they say, all your eggs in one basket. So that makes perfect sense. And it's interesting why people always or never think of it like that. And they always seem to think working for one individual is much more secure than actually going out on your own, which I always find it a bit strange, to be honest. But that's just the prevailing thought, I suppose. So in terms of the title of today's program, it's called the episode, is digital marketing hurting your business? So from your point of view, how so? Yeah, how would, if that is the title, how would you approach that, and how would you explain that to people?
Yes. And I would ask, there's a difference between a transaction business and a relationship business. And a transaction business does not scale up to a relationship business, right? There's certain businesses that are all based on high volume, low margin, and low touch. So if you think of something like Amazon or Netflix, right? These software as a service companies, you can't get a hold of somebody in customer service. It's not the way their business is built, and it works for them. And too often people think, well, what works for this company will work for me too. And that could be the idea of you're one funnel away, right? Oh, I can build a funnel, put all of these things through. Well, if you're working with a high touch, high value, high margin customer, they're not going to put up with that, right? They will leave, right? There's a difference between working with a bank that caters to the masses and one that's a relationship banker. And so this idea of, I can do everything through digital marketing and I'll just remove the human, remove the touch from it. Be careful what you wish for, because you can do it, but it may destroy your business. And I think especially as we talk about things like professional services, consulting, um, business to business, where you're talking about substantial engagements, right? It's one thing to buy something off of a funnel and an ad and a click if it's $5 or $10. But if this is something that's going to impact my life, if this is a major purchase, a major impact on my life or my business, you better believe I want to know who's working on it, what they believe, what their heart is, right? And people always say, "Oh, you're one funnel away." Well, if funnels and Facebook ads work so well, then how come big companies like, consulting companies like Ernst and Young or Bain Capital, you don't see them doing Facebook ads and running, 5-day challenges? If all of this digital marketing worked so great, don't you think Airbus and Boeing would be selling airplanes off of Facebook ads and funnels? It doesn't work that way. What works for a transaction doesn't work for a relationship sale.
Thank you, Roy. That's a really good and clean explanation. So are you saying that funnels and digital marketing doesn't have a place in that relationship type of business, or there's just a different way of doing it?
I think you have to use automation wisely. I'm a big fan of funnels and automation, but they have to, in a transaction sale, they can replace the human. In a
Yep.
relationship sale, they have to enhance the human, right? And so from that standpoint, using that technology, and just, I'll give you this example too, right? If you were dealing with a high level relationship bank, right, you would want to make sure that their website was state of the art, so you could find anything you needed there. But in the same way, if the only way you could ever connect with somebody was with an automated chatbot, you'd be so frustrated with that, right? They realize that there's a place for automation, there's a place for the tools, and it's to empower people, not replace them.
Yeah, so effectively you're saying the right tool for the right job, and not just, as you, I think, eloquently explained, just getting excited because Facebook ads can do this, Google ads can do that, so you just start putting a lot of your money in. Because I remember there was a so-called guru who had like a Shopify site, spends lots of money, and I remember I went to one of their mastermind groups, which is very interesting, and he was showing how fantastic it was to do Facebook ads, and he was showing how much money he was making. But then when you looked at how much money he was actually spending on ads, I was just doing the calculation and thinking, well, actually, that's not really a business. I mean, your margins are like 2% because you're spending so much money to get anything out, but you're projecting just a sales line, and everyone's going, wow, millions of pounds, yeah, but you're spending like millions of pounds in ads. So
Yeah.
what's the point in that?
And
So
one of the things that you probably get the same thing, right? You'll have people that are emailing you, cold email outreach. Hakeem, we can get you, 100 new leads this week, or what would 1,000 new sales calls do for your business this year? It's like, I'm not optimizing for leads. I'm not optimizing for sales calls, right? As a
yeah,
business, you're optimizing for profits, and profits come from happy customers that value what you do. And I remember we talked with a client that wanted to use podcast interviews, and he came to me and he said, well, do you think podcast interviews could give me 5,000 leads this year? And I said, no, I don't see how they could, but why do you need 5,000? And he said, well, this guy was a high level consultant. He said, I did Facebook ads last year and I got 1,000 leads and I got one customer out of it. So I want 5 clients this year. So I guess I need 5,000 leads. And I'm like, no, you need one customer, right? Those other 999 leads wasted your time and wasted their time.
yeah, no, exactly, and I think that you're right as well, because I think the more we do get automated, and I know you say that it's the less efficient we seem to get because we're relying on those tools rather than what we used to do. And that's a question I was thinking about is do you think, because I mean, I go back quite a long way, and in the old days, you didn't have Facebook. You had to do things manually. You had to get out and you had to speak to people. Do you think that was the halcyon day of marketing, or is now the halcyon day of marketing, where you've got all these tools where you can analyze everything at the back end? It's an
I
interesting.
There's a great book called Clicksand, and Bill Troy talks about how so much of the marketing technology we have now is like a casino, right? You get
Yeah,
excited because you get the analytics or the likes, and they're not things that really um, drive revenue. And I think the best marketers are the ones that focus on being effective, not efficient, right? And I
yeah,
think so much of marketing today is becoming more and more efficient at things that are less and less effective, right? We've been talking for what, 15 minutes here? In this last 15 minutes, both you and I could have sent a million emails, right?
yeah.
Easily automate it, do all the rest of this. But would those million emails do anything, or just fill up spam boxes? And often I'll see people that are spending so much time on all the automation, but they haven't talked to a customer. And to me, I would rather have a conversation with one customer to get their feedback than have a survey that's sent out to 1,000 random people that have the time to take the survey.
Yeah, no, I think it's about quality, isn't it, over quantity? Because that example you just gave there, if I'm trying to do some analysis of a market and I speak to 10 good quality people, but I speak to them, it might still be the same survey, but I speak to those people, you engage them in conversation. I think that's much better than me sending out, you just said there, 1,000 surveys to random people who may or may not fill it in, may or may not concentrate on it, as opposed to having an engaged conversation with an individual. So yeah, no, it's very, very interesting. So from your point of view, um, if they, because you just talked about the best marketers are effective, not efficient. So what are the things that you think that they should be doing or should be focusing on that you've seen to get to be more effective rather than efficient?
Yeah, and I think marketers get fired or promoted for being effective, right?
Yeah,
Making the cash register sing, making the business grow. They don't get they don't get promoted or kept on for just being efficient, right? So ultimately, we're in business to be effective here. So what I see people doing, especially at smaller businesses, is realizing where their unfair advantage is, right? So they may not have the budget to be on the Super Bowl in the United States here, and to have that millions of dollars for a 30-second ad. So they have to look at where their unfair advantage is. And that could be doing things that may not scale, maybe having their leadership team out there talking on the circuit. And that could be webinars, it could be podcasts, it could be conferences, those sort of things, where it's very, very effective, but they're using what an Amazon could not, right? It's in
yeah,
some ways talking about guerrilla marketing. And I think sometimes there's a lot to be learned from the unicorns, right? I admire Sir Richard Branson, Elon Musk, Bill Gates, but to say, well, it worked for them, it's going to work for me. No, I've looked at it. Running a 7, 8, or 9-figure business is a lot different than running a publicly traded company with investors, everything else like that.
yeah. No, it definitely is, and I think one of the learnings that I've had, and I don't know if you've seen the same thing, it's about finding what works for you and what works for your business, your product, your service, rather than, and yeah, of course, you can always learn principles from other people, but trying to ape them and just say, oh, well, it worked for them, so I'm now going to put that in I want to be the Elon Musk of whatever it may be. It's like, yeah, but he's an individual who's got a specific set of skills. You haven't got those set of skills. You've got different sets of skills. So play to stay in your lanes. Play to your strengths, which is exactly what you said there. Where have you got an unfair advantage that you can really drive home?
Well, Hakeem, you are so spot on there, because I think often people will tell us, that you need to do this, right? This was what's successful for me. And in some ways, it reminds me if I went to the market today and aisle number 2 was the fastest aisle. I got right through there. Well, if I came to you and said, Hakeem, when you go to the market, aisle number 2, take aisle number 2. It's the fastest one. Well, I'm trying to help you, but you're going to a different market at a different time. So that information is really just useless until you start asking those questions. Well, why was it that way? What made you think that? What was your, what was your clues? And maybe it's like, oh, because aisle 2, aisle 1 had a woman with lots and lots of kids, and I knew they'd be slow. And aisle 3 had somebody that was really old and looked like they'd be slow. So that's why I chose that. Oh, okay. Now you've given me something that I can learn from. Okay, this is what the market was. Here's the different choices. This is how I went there. And so I think that's important there. There's a lot of big data out there. And I have to laugh sometimes when I hear people come back and say, you should send an email at, whatever it is, 10:32 on Tuesday morning, because that's the best open rate. Well, that is as ridiculous as saying that the average temperature of the earth is, I think, 54 Fahrenheit. So you should dress for 54-degree weather. That makes
Yeah.
no sense, but it's true. Right. So I think it's really trying to figure out in your time, in your market, for your customers, figure out what's true for them.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I don't think that that's ever changed. We've got a lot more tools to help you do it, and people get confused with all those. But ever since I've been involved in marketing and sales, it's always about trying to get an understanding of who your customer is and what that customer is looking for, what the pain points, and fulfilling a need that customer has, rather than trying to sheep dip everybody to say, well, all right, all these customers, because it doesn't matter what business you're in, you're never going to get all the customers who are the same. And especially, as you said, when you're in a relationship business, then the differentiation is more significant because the service you're giving is a more personalized service to that individual. So, yeah, that's very, very good advice. I like the analogy of the checkout. I hope you don't mind. I'll probably steal that.
I'll go right ahead. I just hope it translates into English.
No, it certainly does. It's very, very good. So you've got a book, podcast. I don't know why I'm struggling to say podcast today. Podcast Get Profit. So, what's the difference? Because you talked about, obviously, you've got your own business that focuses on that, Interview Valet. Why would you say that sort of marketing using podcast interviews is, it's obviously different, but a better way potentially than other marketing avenues? What's the difference, and how would somebody go around getting started with that sort of marketing process?
Yeah, and I don't think it's better or worse, but it's different and it's better for certain people. So I would say if your sale takes a discussion, right? If it's not just a transaction, it's a relationship. If people have to get to know, like, and trust you. If your audience is more national or global, right? And you can talk to them throughout this medium. If you do well speaking, right? I've written a lot of blogs in my life. They all felt like homework, but I can talk.
Yeah.
And I think today, especially with AI, people want to see who it is that's talking, right? When you see stuff printed and, oh, that's good copy, I wonder if AI wrote that. But when people are having these discussions, it can be very powerful. Now, when you go back to marketing, I guess I look at what's the definition of marketing. And I spent way too many years and way too much money later in life getting my MBA in marketing. And I think my grandfather, God rest his soul, probably could have told me what marketing was. It's starting a conversation with someone that could be an ideal customer. So if you look at that and say, how can I start that conversation? Right? If you're selling things to customers of little kids in your community, well, then great marketing might be sponsoring the little league team, right? Because it gets them where they are there. But if your audience, is busy, they're not on social media all the time, but they're listening to podcasts. They're always looking for different ideas, different solutions. Well, that's a great way to get in their ears for 30 or 45 minutes. And really, the best marketing makes sales easier. Because if somebody listens to you for 30 or 45 minutes and they understand who you are, what you do, what you believe in, it's going to attract the right people and repel the wrong people. And that's what marketing's supposed to do. And so that makes sales much more efficient, right? You don't need a sales development rep to kiss all the frogs to figure out which one's going to be a good client. And so with that, it's more efficient for the prospect. It's more efficient for the customer. And the data has shown that leads that come through podcast interviews, they close faster for higher initial engagement and they churn less because it's really based on a relationship, not just a transaction and let's give it a try.
Excellent. And when you're looking at a podcast interview, when you're saying that you can get leads through that, are you suggesting that the leads come through the guests you get on, or the leads come from people listening to you talking to the guests, or
Now,
from both avenues?
that's a great question. Sometimes people will say, should I be a guest or a host? Right? It's not an either or, it's a both. And I sometimes think about like Uber. Uber is a great platform, but should you be a driver or a passenger? Well, it depends on your goals. And it's the same way with a podcast. If you want to be a guest, that's a great way to get new exposure, to get new leads. Being a host is a great way to nurture your current leads, nurture your current customers. So where we see, and the data shows, is that after somebody listens to your podcast, if they've listened to 5, 10 episodes and they're not a customer, they probably never will be. They still may be an advocate for your company, but to actually go out and get new exposure, to get new leads, to get new customers, you have to go out and speak on other people's stages as a podcast guest.
Okay, that's really good advice. So, if someone wanted to start a podcast, how would they go about it? Because I think a lot of people get very nervous. I mean, as you, I like speaking. I've always liked speaking. So for me, it was just like, oh, so I can speak and actually get guests on and enjoy myself and learn stuff. I couldn't think of anything better, to be honest. But I know there's lots of people who get very nervous. They're not really sure how to start, what to do, what topics to engage in. What would your advice be for those sorts of people?
I would say I would attend podcasts before trying to do your own, right? So most people will listen to podcasts, but quite a few people will podcast guest on other people's shows because then you get sort of a background, right? Well, why does this person record on Riverside and someone else records on Zoom? How do they do their show? How do they get the flow going? I had one client explain to me, she said, it'd be like planning a wedding if you'd never attended a wedding or if you'd never been a part in a wedding. And so from that standpoint, most podcasts, 80% of podcasts die within the first 10 episodes. It's called pod fade in the industry. People start, they get all excited, but then they hit a roadblock or they don't know what they're supposed to do or they don't have a guest or life gets in the way. So a great way to do that. And I've heard there's a great company, Audivita. It's a production company. They call it phase one. And so phase one is about that 3 or 4 month period where you're getting your podcast registered on iTunes. You're coming up with the plans for it. You're recording some episodes. You're editing those. You're getting everything ready. During that phase one, they'll tell their people, go out and be a guest on other people's podcasts because now you're sort of, dare I say, practicing on someone else's stage. You can get comfortable with it. You can get your story down. You can probably find some people to promote your podcast or at least be a guest on your podcast. It's sort of a great trial. And you think about people that start talk shows on television. They've probably been guests on numerous ones. proven themselves before they go out and have their own show.
Okay, thank you. And obviously, I mean, I know you said there's lots of different other forms of marketing, etc., but you specifically have a company that focuses on podcasting. So, having done all the things that you've done, what was the reason why podcasting was really a drive or a draw for you, apart from the fact, like me, we like talking, in terms of where you thought, actually, this is really a medium or a methodology that can help me really drive my business?
Yeah, and I really looked at my previous experience with the company. We were HubSpot's first e-commerce case study, and we built that entire business up through guest blogging. You know, put a
Okay.
guest blog up there, get that know, like, and trust. And then about 10 years ago, I'd seen that podcasts were starting to take off. And so I looked at that as the next avenue. But as I look back, this idea of leveraging other people's audience, it's as old as time, right? We used to do it on television, right? As seen on TV,
Yeah.
or I can think of even before, the internet and some of the other things. My grandfather would go to the local Rotary Club or the local Chamber of Commerce or the local country club, and he'd go there and he'd talk. Well, he was tapping into other people's audiences. And so it's the same thing we're doing here. Even if you were to speak on someone's stage, right, you could start your own conference. Or, Sir Richard Branson could come and say, Hakeem, I would love you to keynote at my talk. Well, let's see. I don't think my first conference is going to be as big as his conference. And in some ways, it's almost like they do the majority of the work. They get the
Yeah.
people there, they set it up. You just get to be the speaker.
Yeah, no, it makes perfect sense. So in terms of the title, because you described as the godfather of podcast interview marketing. So how did that come about?
Well, I was going to say, thank you for saying the Godfather. So I've Christopher Lochhead, who's if you've ever read a book about category design, he's really the mind behind that. He's the one that has called me the Godfather of podcast interview marketing. One of our clients, Carrie Wilkerson, who's known as the Barefoot Executive, she called me
Oh,
the
yeah.
fairy godmother of podcast guesting. And Carrie is such a sweet Southern lady. If anybody else said it, I might be offended, but she is so sweet. It's like, I'll own that. I'll own the fairy godmother of podcast guesting.
Excellent. And then, so in terms of if someone did want to guest, or I mean, we talk about starting your own podcast, but if you want to guest, because that's, as you said, a great way to leverage other people's audiences and start getting yourself out there, and people start seeing you as an expert in whatever area. So how do you do it? How do you approach podcasts? And do you start with small ones, and then as you get more popular, move up the way, or what would your advice be to someone who wants to start trying to do it?
Okay, going back to what we said before, bigger is not better,
Yeah.
and more is not better, right? Better is better. So look at where you can bring value, and also what kind of people you want to talk to, right? Often we'll have people that come to us and say, I want to talk to everyone. Well, not everyone wants to hear you, right? So who are your people, right? I love talking to business owners and marketers, right? I understand the language. They understand me. So as I look at podcasts, I say, who do we have that's listening to those? Could I add things to those? Could I bring value? And, Gary Vaynerchuk wrote that book, Jab, 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 Right Hook. And I probably missed a couple jabs. I look at it as give, 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 ask. And so what I mean by that is give it the time to listen to the podcast. Then, if you think you'd be a good fit on it, leave the podcast a rating and review. Right? Podcast hosts, we're all vain. We listen for those things. Share their content on social media, maybe comment on it, right? So now you've interacted with the host. Now you can reach out to them and say, Hakeem, I really enjoyed the show. I really liked this episode. I think I've got some things that could be beneficial for your audience, right? And if you keep giving like that, the host will ask you to be on the show. And too often people just robo pitch podcasts, and it'll be, dear Hakeem, I hope this day finds you well. I would like to use and abuse your audience to talk about my book or product on, you know, real estate for the expecting mother. And you're like, that has nothing to do with my audience, right? But you and 1,000 other people got that email. So that's one of those things where automation, you can automate all of that, and you can send out 1,000, and maybe you'll get 10 people that say yes. They won't be the 10 people that you want. Much better to find 5, maybe 7 podcasts that you think you'd be great for. Do those things, listen to them, leave a rating and review, share their content, reach out to the host. Then after you do a good job on the podcast, after they turn off the recording, thank the host, ask for any feedback. And then also ask, do you know any other podcast hosts that you think I could bring value to? Podcasters know podcasters.
Yeah.
And if you do a good job, if they tell you 2 or 3, your dance card will get filled up so quickly that you won't have to go out there blind pitching people. You'll get personal introductions to your next interview.
Yeah, no, it's an interesting one, that, because I remember when I first started, then I think everyone did it. You start with people you know, or people that you think are interesting and you can get on. And then I started getting people actually requesting to be on the show, which was, at first you're thinking, oh, this is unbelievable. I'm just going to get, anybody comes on. And then you start thinking, oh, actually, you need to start being a bit more discerning. And actually, the way I would do it is I enter into a conversation, whether it's with the individual or their booking agent. So actually, and the first question I ask is, well, why do you want to be on the show, number one? And how do you know about the show? Because just as you're saying that, I want to know that you really know my show, rather than you've just seen it somewhere and thought, oh, that looks okay, yeah. As you said, I'll use and abuse your audience and I'll get on. Because you very quickly know if someone's actually done any research at all, or they've just said, oh, that looks quite interesting, that popular, so I'll go on that one. So I'm quite, and I think as you move down the line and you move out of that phase where you're struggling, then you start to become much more discerning about who you get on, because you're really trying to serve your audience. And it comes back to exactly what we were talking about before. It's understanding who your audience is and trying to make sure that you give them something of value, and that then automatically dictates the sort of people you want to get on, and it should therefore dictate what sort of shows you want to go on. Sort of go on.
And the guest should be focused on value too, right? The loyalty goes to the listener. The host loyalty should always go to the listener, and the guest's goal should be to provide so much value that the host looks like a genius for having you on there. Right. I can remember podcaster DJ Doug Sandler from Nice Guys on Business podcast. He said, you don't have to promote yourself on a podcast. If you do a good job, the host will promote you more than you ever could. And the flip side is, if you get there and you're all self-promoting and you're selling things, the dirty little secret is that those interviews get lost. Right? They get lost. Something happened with the recording. I'm so sorry. It'll never see the light of day.
Yeah, no, I mean that is so true, because obviously once you got the podcast and you put it into your audience and you're cutting up and putting social media clips, you want real value for not just your podcast audience, but the people that you want to become your podcast audience. So if you're giving real value and real, as you said right at the outset, actionable takeaways, then people want to listen to what you've got to say, rather than someone just coming on and saying, oh yeah, I've got this product, I've got that product, I can do this for you. Actually, no, I'd rather just listen to what you've got to say, and I'll determine whether I think you can do something for me, not you. Which is so on that basis. So if you had 5 key tips or 3 key tips or however many key tips for somebody who wants to get into podcasting, or just wants to focus on becoming a more effective rather than efficient marketeer, what would those key takeaways be for you?
I'm going to keep it easy to one word, and
Yep.
it's my word for the year, and that's being intentional. So
Like
if
it.
you want to be on a podcast, great. What is your intention? What is your reason for being there? Focus on the why, not just all the activity.
Yeah.
If you want to do the marketing, be intentional. You don't have time to do everything. So, what are you trying to accomplish? Where are your clients or customers? And how can you best reach them? Be intentional. When you pick the medium for yourself, be intentional, right? TikTok may work great for other people. I've seen myself, I can't do the little dances, right? It's not going to be good for me. My clients aren't there. I also know that I can write, but I'm an engineer at heart. So for me,
Mm.
talking is the easiest. And then we can repurpose that into other ways. So I would say with everything you do, be intentional. It's too easy with this shiny object syndrome or the new marketing tool that they're selling or the analytics or whatever. Step back and say intentional. Why am I doing this? What is my goal? And will it help me get to that goal?
So based on that, so you're effectively saying, as we were talking about before, in terms of being specific and intentional about what you want to do, podcasting isn't for everybody then, is it?
It is not. And like I said before, it has to be a especially guesting, it has to be more of a relationship sale, a higher lifetime value. You have to be able to serve a national or global audience. You have to have a different point of view, right? If your only position is, um, I do websites, but I do them cheaper than other people, that's not interesting. You have to have a different point of view on that. And so look through those things and then also say, what works best for me? If you have a speech impediment, if you stutter, if you aren't comfortable in front of a microphone, maybe it's not for you. Maybe there's a different medium, or maybe there's somebody on your team that could do that. I can think of a couple podcasts that I know of where you wouldn't guess, but it used to be someone reading a blog, and now it's AI reading the blog. But this person
No.
just couldn't read their own blog on a podcast. So they hired somebody and they'd put the podcast, excuse me, they'd put the blog out. And this is a major company. And then 30 days later, there'd be a podcast episode and it would be someone reading the blog. And nobody ever caught it because the people that read the blogs were different than the people that were listening to the podcast.
Yeah, so good advice. So identify what you're good at and focus on what you're good at. And I think the only thing I'd add is and what you enjoy as well. Because I mean you mentioned it right at the beginning that you enjoy talking, you don't like writing. So then doing a podcast is obvious. But then you have the reverse where you have people who like writing but don't like talking. And there's a way, I mean, when you're selling and doing marketing, you do need to be able to talk to people at some point because it is a relationship business, but there's ways around it. And podcasting probably isn't the medium. Blogging probably is because you love writing. So yeah,
And
sorry, go on.
yeah, and Hakeem, we live in such an amazing day time here, right? There's a lot of problems in the world, but there's no better time to be alive because
Yeah.
we could take this recording from this conversation and we can put it up into a podcast. We can take the video and put it up into YouTube. We can cut it up into little shorts. We can take the transcript and make blogs out of it. Either that having somebody do that or with AI. I was amazed last week. Someone had sent me a link to a website, and you could upload one of your videos, and it would change the language and translate it. So I would say that you and I are speaking, English, two versions of English, right? But it won't be long before somebody's going to download this podcast and it will automatically translate it into whatever language they want. And so we can create in the way that's easiest for us and then use technology so that it's easiest for our client.
Yeah, no, and I think that's a really important point. And on one of my recent podcasts, we talked about AI actually, because lots of people are very fearful of AI. I mean, I've always been known as a bit of a gadget man, to be honest. So I've completely embraced it. But we were talking on that podcast about, well, it's around understanding where it can be beneficial for you in using it. So just as we were talking about, there's always tools, but you don't just use every tool. You identify, okay, so where would that really make a difference to my process and what I do, and how can I use to enhance? And I think you've just given some perfect examples there. So you may be great at doing videos, but you're not really great at writing, trying to get it transcribed, and vice versa. There's so many tools now that can actually really explode your content out of one piece of content. Actually, I've written a blog, I can get now so many pieces of content out of it, or I've done a podcast and I can now get lots of other pieces of content out of that which then amplify my voice in different and varied ways, which I think is, for me, really, really exciting, I must admit.
That's it. We're not going to be replaced by AI. We're going to be replaced by someone who knows how to use AI.
Yes, I think that is really, and I haven't got. In fact, I was in New York. Can't remember, it's a few months ago anyway, and it was really interesting because I talk a lot about the difference between the US mentality and the UK mentality. Not to say that everyone in the UK is like that and everyone in the US is like that. I'm talking about a growth mindset versus a fixed mindset. But when I use a country, I think people resonate a bit more, and it was really very interesting because when I speak to a lot of English people about AI, it's going to take my job. Oh my God, what am I going to do? And there's a billboard in Times Square for Fiverr, and it says, AI took my job, and then just below it says to another level. And I thought that's a perfect real example of the US mindset versus the UK mindset, because it's an articulation of what you just said. You will lose your job to somebody who knows how to use AI, not to AI itself.
Well, thank you for giving us credit for that. I don't know if I would say that's a great generalization, but I remember about a year ago, someone encouraged me to reread a book, and I want to say it's called The Second Industrial Revolution, and it's about 20 years old, and it was all about how computers were going to change the world. And he said, read that book, and every time they say computers, put the word AI in there.
Yeah,
And all of the fears that we had 20 years ago that that computers were going to replace us, it's the same thing with AI right now. And you think back on that, that computers would be running machine shops. Well, it's
yeah,
true, but right now there used to be a machinist that would run that machine. And now there's somebody that's a machinist that knows how to run the CNC machine, and he or she is able to do 10 times as many parts, as 10 times the quality, because they know how to work that machine. And so that's why I always think that it should empower us, not replace us.
most certainly. And I think that's an ideal place on where to start to close up, because I think I've really appreciated your time and appreciated the advice you've given and the ideas that you've given, because what really hits home for me is just focusing on those things that are going to make a difference, and so that you become that real simple statement you made at the beginning: be effective rather than efficient, because people are becoming more efficient. And that then links into what you just said recently about that intentionality, being intentional and understanding why you're doing things and focusing on that. Because if you do focus on that, it's going to lead to everything else. So from your point of view, if there was one thing that, I'm hoping that people take many things out of it, but if there was one thing that you want to leave the audience with, what would that be? What would be your lasting thing that you want people to take from here?
Uh, it's my favorite phrase, and it's been this way for a few decades. It's the comment that what's ordinary to you is amazing to others, right? We all overestimate what other people know and underestimate what we know. when the truth is that you've learned things through your life that could help other people, right? The person that understands fourth grade math is a genius to the person that's in second grade. And he's probably better off to help the second grader than somebody that's got a PhD in advanced mathematics. So I always remind myself of that. What's ordinary to you is amazing to others, and encourage you also. What you know, share it with other people as a podcast guest, as a podcast host, in blogs, whatever it is. I really believe we're blessed to be a blessing. And today, with all this technology, you could really share what you know.
Thank you very much, Tom. And it's been an absolute pleasure. And as per normal, to my listeners and viewers, you'll know that I'll put all of Tom's details in the podcast description. And I think you also said that you may be generous enough to go to the website that's going to be in the podcast description. You're going to be able to get a free copy of Tom's book, which is very, very generous of him, and really appreciate that for my audience.
Definitely. I'm not here to sell the book. If you go to interviewvalet.com/hands-on, I'll put a link there. You can get a copy of the book. If you're in the States, I'll mail you a copy. If you're outside, I'll email you a copy. There's also an assessment. Will podcast interview marketing work for me? And then if you want to talk about this and see how you or your business could use this, I'll put my calendar scheduling link there, all back at interviewvalet.com/hands-on.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Hakeem.
So that wasn't nerve-wracking at all, speaking to the godfather of podcasting, but hopefully you got as much out of that as I did. I've learned a huge amount speaking to Tom there, exceptionally giving, and as he said, give, and then ask. So a different way of marketing your business, but a very effective way of marketing your business. But the key thing to remember that I took out of it was looking at transaction businesses versus relationship businesses, and not just trying to replicate what you see somebody else doing, and not just using digital marketing because you have tools there. Similar to what we said about AI, you have to find the tools that are going to work for you and actually make your business more effective and not just more efficient. And lastly, and the word of the year that Tom said, his word of the year is intentional, and being intentional about what you do. Focus on the why, i.e. where you can find your clients and how you can then reach them. I think that's brilliant advice, and I hope you really enjoyed this session with Tom. And if you want to pick up the show notes, head over to the salesaccelerationformula.com/podcast-show-notes, and you'll be able to subscribe to our mailing list and get show notes for every single episode. And as always, subscribe, like, and share with your friends, colleagues, and anyone else who you think may be interested. But most of all, keep the feedback coming so that we can continue to improve and give you more of what you like. Hope you enjoyed this as much as I did, and as I always do. Keep listening and keep growing.